Enemies are unavoidable. If you're building something genuine, they will appear. Some will confront you openly, while others will mask their hostility with praise. Some seek to destroy you, others pretend to protect you even as they tighten their control. Most people spend their lives dodging enemies, appeasing them, explaining themselves, trying to stay uncontroversial. But Machiavelli did not flee from enemies. He depended on them. To him, an enemy was not a threat, but a resource waiting to be tapped in opportunity. A pawn, a weapon forming. He grasped what many miss. Enemies are more valuable than allies because they move swiftly, think more deeply, and expose themselves faster. In a world full of facades, enemies are genuine. If you learn to wield them correctly, they become more advantageous than any friend could ever be. This is the principle Machiavelli would teach today: not how to avoid enemies, but how to wield them strategically, ruthlessly, and permanently. Here are the 13 rules he used to transform enemies into power. The first rule: never reveal that you see them. Do not acknowledge attacks directly. Let them believe you're unaware while you maneuver behind the scenes. When enemies think you're oblivious, they reveal their true intentions. They speak more, overreach, and relax their vigilance. That's when you act not with confrontation, but with design. The second rule: mirror their behavior, not their energy. If they're loud, remain calm. If they provoke, pause. If they escalate, stay still. Nothing confuses an enemy more than an opponent who refuses to follow their rhythm. Machiavelli said, "Whoever masters the rhythm controls the battle." So don't match emotion, match patterns. Study them, reflect them, then break them on your terms. The third rule: let them underestimate your reach. When they try to isolate you, let them believe they've succeeded. Let them assume you have no allies, no leverage, no influence, then reveal you were never alone. The person they trusted was yours. The system they thought they controlled still belongs to you. Enemies collapse fastest when they believe they have won too soon. Never stop them from celebrating. Let them revel in, then pull the ground from beneath them while they're still raising their glass. The fourth rule: feed their ego, not their attacks. An insecure enemy attacks for recognition. Don't deny it, nurture it. Compliment their ambition. Acknowledge their aggression. Make them feel noticed, and in doing so, place a leash made of flattery around their neck. Now they're predictable, craving your attention, unable to move without imagining your response. You've replaced their autonomy with your shadow. This isn't manipulation. It's psychological architecture. The fifth rule: intentionally leak false information. When they're watching, give them something to find, not the truth, but a version of it. Mention a plan that doesn't exist. Reference a conversation that never happened. Pretend to be angry with someone you trust. They take the bait and act on it. They reveal themselves by reacting to deception. When they act on false information, they unknowingly do your bidding. Machiavelli never battled with swords. He fought with shadows. Sixth rule: elevate a single enemy above the rest. Don't confront the masses. Identify the loudest, most emotional, and reckless among them, and make them the center of attention. Address them subtly, respond indirectly, give them just enough space to inflate, and they will overreach. They will alienate their supporters and expose too much. By the time they realize what has happened, they stand alone on a battlefield of their own making, while you have already moved forward. Seventh rule: turn the weakest enemy into an informant. Every group has a weak link, someone insecure, desperate, or overlooked. Find that person, praise them, confide in them deceptively, offer them the illusion of special access. Then relax and watch as they bring you the intelligence you need. Why battle the whole group when one is already working for you? Loyalty isn't born from trust. It comes from being indispensable. Enemies crave to feel needed more than anyone. Eighth rule: let your enemies speak first. In meetings, debates, or public settings, allow them to talk, posture, and believe they've won the narrative. Then, when silence falls, respond with a single sentence to defend yourself, but to reshape the battlefield. One line that turns their aggression into doubt. One line that makes the audience question everything they've just heard. Never speak first or prolong the argument. Strike once with exactness. Machiavelli said, "He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command with silence." Ninth rule: avoid public punishment unless symbolic. Most enemies sabotage themselves. They overreach, break, and lose control. Let them fall privately. If public action is necessary, keep it surgical statement. One move, one dismissal. No anger, no revengeful clarity. You don't destroy them, you erase their relevance. The crowd forgets their deeds but remembers how swiftly it ended. This is the coldest power, not the roar, but the silence after. There is a difference between defeating enemies and absorbing them. Anyone can fight, but Machiavelli desired obedience. He wanted enemies so destabilized and emotionally off balance that by the time they recognized they were battling the wrong fight, they were already working for him. This is the aim of the 10th rule. Offer redemption, but at a price. You don't pursue your enemy or offer peace. You compel them to come to you. And when they do, after all the damage, posturing, and attacks you, welcome them with mercy, but not without conditions. You offer them a role, a way back, bound by your terms, timeline, and rules. The one who once tried to destroy you now willingly shackles themselves to your command. And they'll follow more rigorously than even your most devoted supporters, because they understand one misstep and the rope snaps. This isn't peace, it's control cloaked in grace. You didn't just defeat them, you transformed them. Then comes the 11th rule. Convert their hatred into proof of your strength. Enemies talk, they lie, they twist, they defame. But Machiavelli wouldn't bother challenging their version of the story. He let it unfold, because with every angry mention of his name, they amplified his presence. Each attempt to harm him only revealed how deeply he occupied their thoughts. That's the strategy. Let their fixation become your evidence. Don't resist it, let it grow. Because the louder they shout, the more others ask, why are they so obsessed? And when the spotlight turns, the contrast becomes clear. Your enemy is consumed and you are composed. One appears erratic, the other immovable. Even those who once disliked you begin to respect your endurance. You didn't react, you didn't collapse. You weathered it all without cracking. That's not defense, that's how legends are made. Then arrives the 12th rule. Disappear, then return, stronger. Once the storm subsides, don't stick around. Withdraw. Let them sit with what they've done. Let them speculate. Let them invent stories. Let them overanalyze every detail. Because absence builds suspense, and suspense adds weight to power. When you reappear, you don't revisit the past. You return sharper, colder, and more advanced. No explanations. Just results. Your silence now carries meaning. Your re-entry isn't casual, it's deliberate. They realize you don't react. You calculate. You don't explain. You move. And this changes how the world sees you. You're no longer someone with enemies. You're the force that resets the tone the moment you arrive. And finally, the 13th rule. Turn your enemy into your brand. Every strike they throw confirms your threat level. Every coalition they form is proof of your reach. And each time they paint you as dangerous, you embrace it. You don't claim to be misunderstood. You say, you're right to be afraid. Because fear, when harnessed properly, is more dependable than affection. You take every weapon they forge against you, your quiet, your unpredictability, your intensity, and you refine it into your insignia. Now, the world doesn't just know you survived them, they understand you consumed them. Their efforts fortified your strength. Their opposition sculpted your reputation. Their fixation built your myth. You didn't crush them with might. You transformed them through presence. You don't need cheerleaders, you need shadows. And enemies make the best kind. They never sleep. They never stop observing. And they spread your name for free. Machiavelli didn't merely survive his enemies, transform them into echoes, amplifying his presence long after he'd vanished. That's how you construct an empire without noise, not through applause, not through sympathy, but through enemies who broadcast your power louder than your supporters ever could. Because here's the harsh truth. People only begin to take you seriously once they've witnessed what happens to those who didn't. When your enemies go quiet, you don't boast. You don't gloat. You don't even acknowledge the outcome. You let silence spread like smoke. Because the true Machiavellian power move isn't defeating your enemy, it's reshaping the world in the space they once occupied. That's how real power is born. Not from revenge, but from recalibration. They're no longer fighting you, they're responding to a version of you they can't comprehend. You've become unpredictable, elevated, unreachable, and those around you feel it even if they never say it. The atmosphere changes when you walk in. Conversations quiet. People weigh their words more carefully. You don't have to speak. You've become the presence they subconsciously edit themselves for. That's not just reputation. That's hierarchy of the mind. And it began with enemies, but it didn't end there. Because once people see you survive betrayal, once they watch you navigate attacks without ever explaining yourself, they understand you're not just a player of the game, you're its architect. That's the start of the transformation. You're no longer a man, no longer a woman, no longer a leader. You've become an environment, a climate that shapes behavior, a pressure that governs without force. This is the reward for choosing composure over emotion, for allowing enemies to combust while trying to expose you, for standing still when others would have shattered. You no longer need approval because you've turned restraint into a weapon. This is the realm Machiavelli operated in. Not influence, but invisible enforcement. He didn't need to declare his capabilities. He became the reminder. That's the ultimate power, when your name isn't just a name, it's a consequence. Not from cruelty, but because you've become the outcome others fear to trigger. This is the psychology of control after conflict. You didn't destroy your enemies, you left them behind. So far, so decisively, that even the thought of catching up feels embarrassing. Let them pretend they still matter. Because by the time they think of you, you're already shaping what they think. And those who once stood against you, they either mimic your playbook or vanish from your path. That's how you build more than fear, more than power, more than triumph. You begin to build authority. The kind that's quiet, unshared, undeniable. You don't have to remind them what happened, they carry the story for you. You don't need to prove who you are, they mold themselves to avoid making you prove it again. This is the point where you stop reacting and start becoming legend. Because the thing about surviving your enemies is this. People remember the fight, but they remember the one who survived even more. And then they begin to ask themselves the real questions. Why didn't you break? Why didn't you need to speak? What do you know that they don't? That final question, that's the one that makes them follow you without ever being told. Because once people believe you understand something they can't see, they stop questioning you. They begin to revolve around you. That's what Machiavelli perfected. He wasn't interested in obedience. He wanted inevitability. So when people thought of him, they didn't picture a man, they envisioned a presence, a principle, a warning dressed in sophistication. And when that's how they see you, you don't need to engage your enemies. They end up fighting themselves just to stay out of your shadow. When your enemies go quiet, the audience notices. They remember how loud those voices once were, how bold, how certain. And now they're gone. No spectacle, no confrontation, just absence. And the void where opposition once stood. You didn't just win, you established a rhythm. And the human brain learns from rhythm. One voice challenges you, it vanishes. Another mocks you, it folds. A third sows doubt and they're erased. Not with noise, not with defense, but through your quiet movement. And soon, people begin to adjust themselves. They moderate their tone when speaking your name. They avoid mentioning you in certain places. They couch disagreement in compliments because no one knows exactly what happened, but they all know something did. This is Machiavellian power expansion. When enemies no longer drain your energy, they amplify your reach. Because fear travels faster than logic. And once fear becomes linked to your identity, you no longer need to assert control. People manage themselves. You've arrived at a place most leaders dream of. Self-perpetuating authority. Your past rivals become warnings, case studies shared in whispers. People say, don't test him unless you're ready. Look what happened to the last one. Just stay clear, it's not worth it. None of that messaging comes from you. It comes from what you allowed others to perceive. That's the strategy. You don't rebut accusations. You foster uncertainty. You don't crush enemies. You let them spiral just far enough for everyone to witness their downfall. Now, the crowd acts as your enforcer not out of loyalty, but through recognition of the pattern. They've seen how it ends, and they adjust accordingly. No one wants to be the next example. No one wants to be your next cautionary tale. No one wants to find out what you might do. So they tread lightly. They praise you. They stay away. You've made submission the path of least resistance to know by charm, but by outcome. And once you reach this level, you don't need to be present. You just need stories. The story of how you handled disrespect. The story of a critic who vanished. The story of silence that followed one wrong move. It doesn't matter if it's embellished, misremembered, or fictionalized. What matters is they're telling it. What matters is that the story lives on. The myth does far more than the truth ever could. That's the essence of legacy-driven fear, not the kind that roars in someone's face, but the kind that lingers quietly in their mind. The kind that slows their voice when they speak your name. The kind that alters their behavior before you even walk in the room. And here's the real genius. You didn't construct this with friends. You built it using your enemies. The ones who tried to dismantle you, they gave you their attention. They handed you the spotlight. They created the stage so others could watch. You didn't need a platform, they built it for you out of spite. And when they fell, your silhouette only grew. Because there's something unnerving about watching someone endure hostility without reacting to it, makes observers silently ask, what if that silence turned toward me? That thought, that pause, is where true power resides. It's not flashy. It's not fleeting. It's deeply rooted, subconscious, unshakable. No speech, no campaign, no charisma can replace that. And once it's embedded, you don't have to wield it. Let them carry it. Let them wonder if it still lingers. Because the longer you don't respond, the more powerful they imagine you become. When power matures, it stops yelling. It starts whispering. Then it vanishes. But even in absence, it governs. This is the state Machiavelli perfected, not domination by presence, but control through memory. Once you've turned their attacks into your mythology, once you've revealed their motives and redirected their aggression into your legend, you disappear. Not from fear, but by design. Because visibility invites risk. And those who constantly need to declare their strength are already losing it. Real power doesn't announce itself. It builds architecture networks of silence that continue functioning long after you've stepped away. Those who once opposed you no longer fight. They begin to imitate. They adopt your tactics. They echo your tone. They operate by your rules without ever naming the source. Your language becomes their framework. Your restraint becomes their armor. Your stillness becomes their signal. And they'll never credit you because to do so would be to admit defeat. So they replicate you in secret. That's legacy not in fans, but in imitation. You don't show up in their mentions. You show up in their systems. You've gone from adversary to benchmark, from person to protocol. They edit strategies based on your past. They lower their volume because of your silence. They hesitate because they remember your patterns. You never had to intimidate them. You didn't destroy them. You simply stood firm as they unraveled on their own. Now they carry your doctrine like a ghost in their decisions. One they dread, but can't escape. This is Machiavellian ghost power. Power that's unseen. Power without label. Power woven into behavior. Even those closest to you no longer ask your thoughts. They preempt them. They begin adjusting their behavior before you've even seen their actions. Why? Because the consequence already exists in their imagination. You don't need to intervene, you're already present in their unease, in their calculations, in their hesitation. You govern without being seen. And that's exactly the point. Enemies become caution signs. Silence becomes instruction. Your name becomes a boundary one they don't dare to cross, even when you're not looking. They hesitate before they disagree. Not because they fear confrontation, but because they know if you were ever to respond, it wouldn't be emotional. It would be absolute. That's the most potent kind of forcino, the one that retaliates, but the one that could and simply chooses not to. Because once you've shown you can endure without reacting, you've shown you don't need to fight at all. You become a presence that doesn't compete, a mind that doesn't chase, a silhouette that persists even in the absence of light. This is the insight few ever reach. To command without closeness, to lead without movement, to leave an impression without aggression. It's a power your enemies handed you, and now they fear what they helped create. You weren't seeking power. You were shaping gravity. A pull so measured, so subtle, it alters behavior without contact. And now, enemies are no longer essential. They've done their part. They gave you resistance, exposure, and legend. You don't resent them. You acknowledge them. Because without them, there'd be no myth to respect, no shadow to whisper about, no invisible line everyone knows not to cross. That's the ultimate form of Machiavellian power. Power that doesn't wait for conflict, it invents it, just to leave a message. Enemies aren't threats anymore. They're raw material. You shape them, fracture them, reforge them. You don't silence opposition, you let it speak, let it unravel itself. And then you remove it not with noise, but with such overwhelming quiet, they begin to question whether you ever existed at all.